It was a great movie, but
Yeah.
it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
Especially with something like The Passion that I did, the written word was very important because it was, you got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. Half the time, they didn't even need to read the subtitles. They could look at it and know what was going on.
20 years, $2 billion in worldwide revenue. And according to the man who made it, almost nobody actually understood what they were watching.
My contention is, when I was making it, it was like, you're making this film, and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind.
When Mel Gibson sat across from Joe Rogan on January 9th, 2025, he said something that stopped the conversation cold. He said that the Passion of the Christ contains a hidden layer of meaning, a message encoded into the architecture of the film itself, that audiences have been walking past for 2 decades without seeing it. Not Easter eggs, not background details for the trained eye, a structural message. Deliberate, theological, hidden in plain sight from the very first frame. Rogan went quiet. That almost never happens. What Gibson revealed that night connects to a 2,700-year-old text, a 19th century mystic's visions, a series of inexplicable events on a film set, and a question that scholars have argued about for centuries. Was the most violent scene ever filmed in Hollywood history actually the most precisely engineered act of theological communication ever put on screen? The story is much stranger than the controversy, and it starts somewhere most people never thought to look. Imagine for a moment that you spent $30 million of your own money to produce a film that every major Hollywood studio had already rejected. You shot it in 2 dead languages. You had no distribution deal. No major star wanted to touch it. The prevailing wisdom in every meeting you walked into was that you were committing financial and professional suicide. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what Mel Gibson did in 2002. And the hidden reason he did it, the thing he finally put into words on Rogan's podcast, is what this video is about. The year was 2002. Mel Gibson had won Best Director and Best Picture for Braveheart. He had been one of the highest paid actors in the world for 15 years. He carried more institutional power in Hollywood than almost anyone alive, and he walked into studio after studio carrying a script that every single one of them refused. The script was written in Aramaic and Latin, 2 languages that had been functionally dead for centuries. There were no major stars attached, no romantic subplot, no commercial hook. One studio executive reportedly told Gibson it wasn't a movie, it was a religious document. Gibson co-wrote the screenplay with Benedict Fitzgerald and then funded the entire production himself, approximately $30 million of his own money, with no guarantee of a single dollar back. He shot it in Matera, a city in southern Italy that felt cinematically like the most honest answer to what Judea looked like 2,000 years ago. Matera is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth. Walking its streets is unlike anywhere else on the planet. The buildings grow directly out of the rock face, carved from pale limestone by hands that have been dust for millennia. The alleyways are narrow and the ceilings press low. In the morning, the light is thick and amber, the exact color of old parchment. The air carries limestone dust and something quieter, a stillness that doesn't exist anywhere built recently. At midday, the heat radiates up from the stone beneath your feet and down from the stone above you, and you feel held inside the rock, inside the age of it. That is the atmosphere Gibson wanted, not as decoration, as argument. The film covered the final 12 hours of Jesus Christ's life, from his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane to his death on Golgotha. It opened on Ash Wednesday, February 25th, 2004. It made its entire $30 million budget back in the first weekend. By the end of its theatrical run, it had grossed $370.8 million in the United States alone, making it the highest-grossing R-rated film in American box office history, a record that still stands. Gibson didn't make the film to break records, and he didn't, by his own consistent account, make it to generate controversy. He made it to communicate something very specific. To do that, he made a choice at the very beginning, one that most audiences registered and almost none examined. The very first image in The Passion of the Christ is text. Before any actor appears, before the garden, before the darkness and the torchlight, you see words. a verse from the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, verse 5. He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. By his wounds, we are healed. Most viewers read that as a dedication, a nice, appropriate epigraph before a difficult film. That was the wrong reading entirely. Isaiah 53. Most people recognize the name without knowing what it actually contains. Here is what it contains. Written approximately 700 years before the birth of Jesus Christ by a Hebrew prophet in Jerusalem, the 53rd chapter of Isaiah describes a figure known as the suffering servant. The text describes this figure being despised and rejected by those around him. It says he will be beaten, pierced, crushed. It says his appearance will be disfigured beyond recognition, marred more than any man. It says he will remain silent before his accusers. It says he will be counted among criminals in his death. It says he will be buried in a rich man's tomb. Every single one of those details appears in the gospel accounts of the crucifixion, written 7 centuries later, not as parallels, not as general similarities, as specific, sequential correspondences, detail by detail in the same order. When Gibson opens The Passion of the Christ with that Isaiah verse, he isn't decorating his film. He is making a thesis. He is saying what you are about to watch is not a story. It is the fulfillment of a prediction written in advance by someone who had no way of knowing what they were predicting. That claim, not the violence, not the language, not the anti-Semitism controversy, is the hidden message at the center of the film. Scroll through scholarly literature on Isaiah 53 and you find a consensus that is anything but settled. John Oswalt at Wesley Biblical Seminary has written extensively on the exegetical complexity of the passage, arguing that the text describes an individual, not a collective. The mainstream Jewish interpretive tradition, held consistently for 2,000 years, reads the suffering servant as a metaphor for the nation of Israel, a people who suffered unjustly and collectively, not one man on a Roman cross. The debate is ancient, technical, and unresolved. That unresolved debate is exactly what Gibson pressed into his opening frame. The data was clear. The implications were anything but. Gibson didn't just quote Isaiah 53. He built the entire film around it. Scene by scene, moment by moment, the Passion of the Christ moves through the 53rd chapter like a visual translation. The silence of Jesus before Pilate. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. The scourging. By his stripes we are healed. The 2 thieves on either side. He was numbered with the transgressors. The tomb, provided by Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Jerusalem Council. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Watch the film with Isaiah 53 open beside you. It reads like a screenplay that was written 7 centuries too early. There is a quiet detail in how Gibson assembled his source material that most people don't know. Gibson had been carrying a battered copy of a book called The Dolorous Passion of Our Lord Jesus Christ for years before the film came together. He didn't go looking for it. By his own account, the book literally fell off his shelf one afternoon. He picked it up. He started reading. He didn't stop. The book was written by a German Augustinian nun named Anne Catherine Emmerich, who lived from 1774 to 1824. Emmerich never traveled to Jerusalem. She spent years bedridden in Germany, reportedly bearing the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, in her hands and feet. In the years before her death, she experienced a sustained and extraordinarily detailed series of visions of the Passion of Christ. Her secretary, the poet Clemens Brentano, transcribed them over hundreds of pages. Those visions included specifics not found anywhere in the 4 Gospels. The names of the 2 thieves crucified beside Jesus. The Gospels never named them. Emmerich did. Dismas and Gesmas. Gibson used those names. The specific layout of the road to Golgotha, the number of times Jesus fell while carrying the cross, the configuration of the nails. Emmerich described all of it, and Gibson, in constructing the most physically specific depiction of the crucifixion ever put to film, used her account alongside the scriptural record. The question this raises is uncomfortable. If Emmerich's visions were accurate, they represent something beyond ordinary cognition. A woman who never visited Jerusalem, writing in the early 19th century, describing the physical details of an event 1,800 years in her past with the specificity of an eyewitness report. If they weren't accurate, Gibson built portions of his film on embellishment rather than history, and presented that embellishment as sacred truth. Gibson's answer, when pressed, has never wavered. He told Rogan, "I do actually believe this stuff to the full, not metaphorically, not traditionally, literally, entirely. If you're finding this fascinating, a like truly helps this channel continue investigating these mysteries. Several people on set found that literal belief harder to dismiss than they'd expected. Jim Caviezel was Gibson's only choice to play Jesus. Gibson reportedly tried to talk him out of it before the offer was even made, telling him directly, "You'll never work in this town again." Caviezel took the role anyway. What happened to him during filming has never been adequately explained. During the filming of the Sermon on the Mount sequence, Caviezel was struck by lightning. He described the experience to the 700 Club. He felt it coming about 4 seconds before it hit. He watched the extras grab the ground. He felt fire coming out of his head, his body suddenly luminous in the afternoon air. The cameras hadn't finished panning to his position yet. Minutes later, assistant John Michelini walked over to check on him and was also struck. It was the second time Michelini had been hit by lightning during the production. His nickname in the film's credits, Lightning Boy, was not invented for effect. Caviezel also dislocated his shoulder during the scourging sequences. A real whip caught him across the back during a take, tearing a 14-inch gash across his spine. During the extended weeks of crucifixion filming, he developed pneumonia and then hypothermia. He was genuinely ill for months at a stretch while playing a man being tortured to death. And Luca Lionello, who played Judas, arrived on set as an outspoken atheist. He left the production as a practicing Christian. He said the experience of embodying the man who betrayed Christ opened something in him he didn't know was there. This is where the story splits. One path leads to a conventional explanation. The other leads somewhere far more uncomfortable. The conventional path. Dangerous location shoots produce dangerous accidents. Method actors internalize their roles. A film about faith can produce faith in impressionable people. All of that is true. All of it applies. The other path is the one Gibson has always walked. He described the atmosphere on set during key scenes to multiple interviewers over the years. A heaviness the crew felt without being able to source it. A darkness that descended over certain takes and left everyone briefly silent. Equipment would crash without apparent cause. During some of the crucifixion sequences, crew members who had arrived on set as non-believers were, by the end of the shoot, openly weeping. Something dark was there, Gibson said, not as a director describing a difficult production, as a man describing something he encountered and has never stopped believing. Step back from the film itself for a moment. From the controversy, the box office, the lightning. Look at the structure Gibson actually built. He constructed a film that opens with a prophecy, proceeds to fulfill that prophecy image by image across 127 minutes, and ends with the first light of resurrection breaking across an empty tomb. The structure isn't dramatic in the Hollywood sense. It's liturgical. It follows the same logic as a traditional Latin Mass. The Passion of the Christ doesn't tell a story so much as it reenacts one. That distinction is everything. Some scholars have proposed that this is the real reason the studios refused the project. Not the violence, not the language, not the preemptive anti-Semitism controversy. What the studios actually couldn't accommodate was a film that presented the crucifixion as something foretold, because a prediction that's specific, fulfilled that precisely, doesn't leave you many comfortable positions. Either it's the most improbable coincidence in the history of religious literature, or it isn't. Of course, there are simpler explanations. The authors of the Gospels almost certainly knew Isaiah 53. They may have shaped their accounts, consciously or otherwise, to echo the older text. Crucifixion was common enough in the Roman world that silence before accusers, death alongside criminals, and burial in a donated tomb could all be historically accurate without any prophetic dimension. This is the scholarly mainstream, and it is not unreasonable. But one detail resists the explanation cleanly. Isaiah 53 specifies that the suffering servant's bones will not be broken. This was not standard Roman practice. Soldiers routinely broke the legs of crucifixion victims to accelerate death in a procedure called crurifragium. In the Gospel of John, soldiers approach all three of the crucified men to break their legs. They break the legs of the two thieves. They do not break the legs of Jesus because he is already dead. John records this explicitly as the fulfillment of Scripture. The medical reality. Jesus died before the others, likely from the accumulated trauma described in the Passion accounts, is consistent with the physical suffering depicted. An author fabricating correspondences with Isaiah 53 would have had to engineer the precise timing of Jesus' death to align with a detail in a text written 7 centuries prior. That is a remarkably specific thing to fabricate. Researchers at institutions like Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Illinois have argued that Isaiah 53 represents the most statistically improbable single prophetic coincidence in ancient religious literature, if coincidence is even the right word. Mainstream Old Testament historians counter that reading the passage as individual prophecy rather than collective symbol for Israel's suffering requires importing assumptions into the Hebrew that the original language doesn't support. Both positions are held by serious scholars. Both remain standing. What Gibson did was refuse to remain neutral. He picked a side, spent $30 million making his argument visible, and opened with the thesis statement in the very first frame. If we take the film at face value, as Gibson does, fully and without reservation, the opening of the Passion of the Christ is not a quote from Scripture. It is a claim about the nature of history itself. It is saying that what you are about to watch was in some meaningful sense written before it happened. That is the secret message. That is what 20 years of audiences walked past. Joe Rogan is not a simple audience. He has interviewed physicists, combat veterans, former presidents, and the full range of human belief and disbelief. He pushes back. He follows threads. When Gibson described what he believes the film contains, the Isaiah 53 architecture, the supernatural events on set, his literal and total faith in the story, Rogan went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Thinking quiet. Because what Gibson described was not mysticism dressed as film theory. It had a structure. The Isaiah 53 correspondences are not a matter of interpretation. You can count the specific details, line them up, check them against the gospel accounts one by one. The supernatural events on set weren't claimed only by believers. They were documented in production records, witnessed by crew members who had not signed up for a religious experience and who, in several cases, went home permanently changed by what they encountered. Caviezel has spent 20 years describing the making of that film not as the role of his career, but as the event that defined his life. He said to a congregation in Florida that he would do it again, knowing every cost, without hesitation. And now Gibson is making the sequel. He told Rogan that the script for The Resurrection of the Christ took 7 years to write. He wrote it with his brother and with Randall Wallace, who wrote Braveheart. He described the film as an acid trip. The narrative begins with the fall of the angels. It ends with the death of the last apostle. It moves through realms. He said he isn't wholly sure he can pull it off. That combination, enormous ambition, genuine doubt, and complete literal belief, is precisely what made the Passion of the Christ the thing it became. Not a film, not quite. Something that people watched and came away from unable to place exactly what had happened to them. The message was always in the first frame. It was always Isaiah 53. And Isaiah 53 was always the same question. Who exactly was this written about, and when? 20 years of audiences watched the Passion of the Christ. Most came away talking about the violence, the blood, the controversy. Very few came away talking about the opening verse, what it claimed, and what the next 127 minutes spent demonstrating. Maybe that was always the intention. A message designed for those who are looking doesn't announce itself. It sits in the first frame, patient, waiting for the right moment. So here's the question that Gibson's film has always carried and never answered aloud. If Isaiah 53 describes the crucifixion in specific, sequential detail, written 7 centuries before it happened, what does that do to every assumption we carry about history being random and unpredicted? Or is it possible that the real hidden message isn't the prophecy at all, that it's something simpler and stranger? That one of the most powerful men in Hollywood walked away from every professional interest he had, spent $30 million of his own money, and made a film he believed was already written before he was born. If this changed how you see what Gibson actually built, share it with someone who's watched the film without reading the first frame, because the frame was always the film, and the film was never quite finished.